Good. So thank you for joining us today. I'll call the November 14th, 2024 meeting of the Police Advisory and Oversight Board to order. First, I'll have each members introduce themselves, starting on my right.
Scott Paul.
Lucretia King.
Conrad Thomas.
Dave Hoganson.
Joanna Johnson.
The next item is to approve the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. The next item is to approve the minutes of the October 10th, 2024 meeting. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Can I get the
Second.
second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. The next item is public comments. Those who wish to address the Police Advisory and Oversight Board must use the sign-in sheet. Speakers must state their name and will be limited to 3 minutes. Comments should not contain any profanity nor any personal attacks. Do we have any that have signed up?
Nobody signed up tonight.
The next item is to, we'd like to reschedule another brown bag date to allow those members that was not present to provide their input regarding maybe future topics and other types of discussions. A doodle pool will be sent out for those members to schedule the best time that we can meet.
Can we, I think last time when we were picking a date too, we were just, it seemed like, maybe I'm wrong, but it seemed like we were focused on like a Thursday. Like, I don't know if a different day is more available for some people, you know. So I don't know if in the next poll, if we could have access to maybe different days of the week. So, you know, so it doesn't have to be pushed out so far. So we kind of had it pushed out so far because that was when everyone could attend, but there were only 4 of us who attended, so we couldn't get a lot. I mean, it wasn't an action meeting anyway, but it wasn't a lot of feedback, you know?
So don't the doodle pool basically allow us to select both the dates and time that we'd like to meet?
Yeah, like, can we have options
Oh,
that aren't
okay.
just Thursdays? I don't know if that would be
Yes.
helpful, like,
I would
maybe.
think so.
Absolutely. So are there days that the board would not, Friday probably would be one of them, right? Or do you want Friday? So whatever days you don't want, we'll just create the doodle pool around the other days and shoot that out.
Okay.
And then what time frame are we going to try and get that in the next month? We do have a meeting on
I think it's
December 12th.
12th.
Yes. And then you have the holidays. So, I mean, if other days are available, then maybe we can get that in, but just for your discussion.
Tanya nor I have received any questions from the community members. Are there any questions that you'd like to bring up? If not, yes?
No, I think I brought something up at the brown bag that maybe we were gonna talk about next time, but I can't remember right now what it was.
As like a presentation?
No, just a question from the community. I don't remember what it was. Do you remember?
I know there was the topic of restraining orders and
Right.
protection orders. Is that what you were thinking of?
It might not be a bad thing to revisit again.
Okay. Chief, I know that you wasn't, at least we hadn't thought that you would be present for tonight's meeting. Don't know if you have anything you would like to bring up.
Sure, just some updates, yeah. And I wasn't, except for the incident that happened yesterday. So as everyone's aware, we had an officer-involved shooting yesterday morning. It's under investigation by the North Dakota Bureau of Criminal Investigation. No officers were injured. The individual involved is deceased on scene. So we'll let North Dakota BCI take that investigation and wait for the results of that. Departmentally, I think everyone's doing well under the circumstances. Again, kind of another traumatic event for everybody in a not too large amount of time. Absent any questions, I think those are the main updates on our end at this juncture.
The next item is our presentations. For our first presentation will be from the Fargo Police Department, Victim Services and Specialists.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Jordan DePalma, and I am the first ever Victim Services Specialist for Fargo PD. Just want to say thank you for having me here tonight to be able to highlight all of the cool things that our department's doing in the realm of victim services. So a little bit about my role and responsibilities. This position is new. It was created in 2023, and I started my position in October of 2023, so I have a whole year under my belt. I'm in year 2, and in that year, I got to help shape policy and framework, and that's really cool. And so that kind of guided what my caseload and what my day-to-day looks like. So essentially, I help victim survivors by helping them navigate the criminal justice system. And so, as we all might be familiar, officers respond to a call for service, and if there is an arrest, then it can be adjudicated through the court system, and then it's like a whole other world. There's all these acronyms and legal terminology, and that can be really overwhelming to victims, especially if it's their first time really ever going through something like that. And so I help them just understand the legalese, so to speak, in normal language, and I introduce them to their victim witness coordinator. Cass County has 3, and so they're assigned via the alphabet, and essentially just kind of let them know that in addition to myself, there's someone else that knows way more about the court system than I do that can help them navigate that. I help give referrals to community resources, such as Rape and Abuse Crisis Center, Fix It Forward. I'm blanking on all of the other ones right now, but we have quite a few. And if I do open a case, which I'll get to in a little bit in the presentation, I do conduct a needs assessment with our victims to help identify primary needs and then secondary needs. And unfortunately, for a lot of our victim survivors, they don't have a strong support system or a strong support network. And so I do serve as that person in the sense of giving them that emotional encouragement of, this is very hard, what you're trying to do, but you can do it. And then making sure that they know they have resources either through rape and abuse or through the state, pending their circumstances, for mental health counseling and things of that nature. I also work really closely with officers and detectives to support victims. So a lot of our detectives, especially for our adult sex assault unit, I'm working right alongside them and giving the victim that emotional support through those interactions. Currently, right now, I'm only working with adults 18 and up, and that is because the state of North Dakota has a lot of resources for minors. So we have our Red River Children's Advocacy Center. We have, I can't remember their new name. They formerly were known as CAUSE, in addition to the juvenile court system and just and social workers, caseworkers, CPS, all of those things. And so I occasionally, if it's needed or requested, I can work a juvenile case, but most of the time I'm working with adults that have a charge or have experienced domestic violence, sex assault, or assault. So essentially my day-to-day operations, each morning I come in and I review all calls for service for the previous day. If it is a Monday, then I review them for Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday night, or all of those days. And calls for service, whether a report is made or not, I'm still reviewing even call notes for those 3 crime types I just mentioned. If there is a case report, I read through that and I attempt to reach out to the victim. If they answer, then I kind of, like I said, I do that resource referral. I let them know who I am, what I do. If it's a good time for them to talk. If it's not, then I reschedule for later that day or the next day. And if they don't answer, then I just leave a very vague voicemail for safety reasons. And I usually try to get in contact with someone at least 3 times before I kind of move on with that. So in the needs assessment, I'm looking for, like, what are your immediate barriers to safety? So, like, what are things that are keeping you from either leaving the situation? Is it finances? Is it food access? Is it childcare? Is it like all 3? Is it a lot of other things? And so kind of looking through what those needs are, what resources can I get you connected to so that we can, again, just like remove those barriers to your safety. I work a lot with their victim witness coordinator, especially if they are going through the court system. There's, again, a lot more resources through the state for those purposes, as well as community advocates, which is Rape and Abuse Crisis Center, just to provide wraparound services. So they're getting like multifaceted support, and also so they can visually see that there's not just me, there's like tons of other people that want to see them safe and healthy. And then once I kind of do that, if I have time left in the day, I will kind of walk around and just touch base with each detective in adult violent crimes and adult sex assault regarding case updates. And then I also field a lot of questions from victims regarding protection orders and restraining orders, child custody questions, and court-related processes. So while most of those things are civil issues, meaning they're not going to go through the criminal justice system, they still play a really big role in domestic violence, sex assault, and our ag assault things. And so a lot of those could be good for that victim. It might hinder them, and it might hinder another victim. So it's very case by case. And I do like to note with my victim survivors that I am not a confidential advocate. So Rape and Abuse Crisis Center through the state is considered confidential, meaning that what a survivor shares with their advocate there, they are not legally obligated to share that with law enforcement. So if they went and said, I've experienced sexual violence, they do not need to pick up the phone and like file a report, such as a nurse or a teacher or something of that nature. Whereas if a victim lets me know maybe there's additional information that they haven't shared with the officer just because of it was a chaotic call, or they just now remembered, or anything like that, I do make sure before we even get to the needs assessment that they understand that I'm not confidential. If they do want someone who's confidential, I refer them right then and there to Rape and Abuse Crisis Center. So, because I understand that working with law enforcement may not be the safest option for victim survivors in that moment. So these, I wanted to show you all some statistics and kind of just so you can understand the volume of, even in my first year, kind of what my numbers look like. And so my verbiage is a little different from the traditional like detective caseload. So what is a contact is someone that I have called and just, I actually talk to them on the phone. And then a case is someone who said, yes, I would like to take you up on those resources, and it kind of evolved from there. Some cases are done within the month, some continually evolve, and I kind of carry them over into the next month. So for January, I had 104 total contacts. As you can see, a bulk of those were for domestic violence cases. And of those cases, at that time I was not working ag assaults yet, but as you can see, a lot of those turned into new cases. So, and then same for February, it's just smaller numbers. February is the shortest month of the year. I still had quite a few domestic violence contacts. In March is when I started working our homicides and assault. So you'll see kind of as we go through that the numbers kind of spike. So as you can see, as we hit the warmer months, contacts start going up. That is very aligned with national averages and national statistics, especially when you look in the very northern part of the country. Everyone's going kind of cooped up all winter, and so they're roaring to get out there. And then as you're out in the warmer weather, you're drinking more, and that obviously like hinders or loses inhibitions and things of that nature. So that's kind of why you can see the assaults start to escalate in the summer months, and domestic violence is escalating as well as sex assaults. And then as we kind of go back into the cooler months, domestics and sex assaults kind of level out a little bit. But there's always, like the holidays, there will be a spike in domestics because everyone's with their family, they're stressed out, they may not have appropriate coping mechanisms and things of that nature. Oh, yeah. So that is just a brief overview of my presentation. I know I wanted to be wary of time, so at this, I don't know if it's this time or after both presentations for questions.
Any questions now?
Okay.
I do have a question.
Okay.
Based on your statistics, I didn't see anything regarding ethnicity. That's not tracked?
I am tracking that. It would just be like 0.05 font if I put all of those things on the slide. So in my spreadsheet, I am tracking male, female, ethnicity, age, if an arrest occurred or not. And then I also am tracking if later on in the legal process, if that case has been declined, meaning the state's attorney's declined charges, or if it's been dismissed. And so I do share that data up in memos, and most of our domestic violence cases are declined or dismissed, mostly because, like I said, it's not safe most of the time for victims to fully cooperate or support the charges that are going through the court system. So they may completely financially depend upon the offender, and they might have children with them. And so they are like, if they go to prison, who's going to support us? And so unfortunately, that's our most heavily declined, just because we have victims who are unsupportive of those. So I do keep track of a lot more data than what is up here. That's a good question.
I have a question. This is a new role for the force here. And as your numbers are going up, I'm wondering, this is gonna be too much for one person.
Yes, so, yes, it will be eventually. The plan and the hopes is that in the next, like, 10 years, we do get to expand the team unit, whatever you want to refer to it as. And then this is a trend, I don't want to say trending, because that's not the right word. This is a growing position across law enforcement agencies across the country, as they're seeing a lot more engagement from victims. Again, if you receive those stabilizing services and you're no longer afraid of retaliation from your abuser or your offender, whoever, you're more likely to be engaged and participate in the legal system. And so larger cities, much larger than us, for example, Miami, Atlanta, they have like 30, 50 victim services, and they each respond to their own units. And so while I hope that we never, I mean, maybe one day we'll be 30, 50 victim services people, but I do hope in the next years before I retire, I hope I get to see the growth of this position.
I've got a question, or a couple actually. So domestic violence looks to be a prevalent problem. So if I look at July, where it says 82, and then down below it says 28, does that mean in July there were 28 new incidents of domestic violence, and the remainder are you're still talking with?
So the 82 number is how many contacts I made. So that means that out of, I can't remember the total calls of domestic violence for July, but out of those calls, 82 answered the phone and said, yep, I will take resources referrals. And then 28 of those 82 needed ongoing resources and support, whether that was with the wraparound services, or maybe in the next day they had another domestic. And so, okay, we need to really expedite the protection order process or things of that nature. So that just means that 28 of those 82 developed into new cases.
Okay, and do you track the number of new incidents of domestic violence versus chronic repeat incidents?
Yes.
How
And
does
so,
that look?
yes, so that's something that I've been really passionate about since starting, because we know that domestic violence is often a cycle. And so we do have, right now I'm working with, I'd probably say 4 people that just continually are in that repeat cycle of police are called, a protection order is issued, but then maybe it's dropped, or they both decide that they're not going to follow the protection order, again, because of those financial reasons or whatever. And then they kind of just keep going round and around. And so that is something that, because I am tracking these, I'm able to flag those individuals and work even closer with rape and abuse and the victim witness coordinators to say, okay, in this situation, the order of protection is not the best safety measure. And then in that case, we will meet with the victim survivor and say, okay, what is the best for you in this moment? Keeping in mind that your number one priority, or our number one priority, is your safety. So we can't just say, well, just drop everything, type of situation. So, yeah, so we are tracking those. And then we, again, just make sure that we keep following up and treat every time like it's the first time we're getting called, whether it's the first time or it's the 30th time that I've worked with that person. I always do a needs assessment because their needs are continually changing.
Do you find that when it's repeated, is there a pattern where the individual or individuals are not wanting help and versus they're accepting what the resources you're offering, and maybe there's a better chance of a resolution or not repeating?
I think it depends. It's very case by case. So there are some that are also, their abuser is also their dealer, and so they're battling addiction, and then now they're also financially tied up with them, and they might also have 1 or 2 kids with them, and so there's a lot of factors at play that just because we address one need doesn't mean the other ones are mitigated. But then so in that situation, it's all about like, how do we keep you safe while we long-term plan to get you out of this situation, whether that is, again, working with community partners to get you into mental health, counseling, rehab, all of those things, so that at the end of the day, whether it's in 3 months or a year, you are in your own place, you're safe, your kids are safe, you're financially stable. So it kind of just looks different for each person.
Okay. And then finally, if through your first year, what would you say would be some of the top areas where we need to maybe have more resources available? Are you finding there's enough that you can offer, or where do we need help?
There could always be more resources. I think there could be an infinite amount, and we would eventually have to get more. But I would say we do have resources through the state, and it's actually funded through the federal government, called Victim Compensation. It's funded through the Office for Victims of Crime, yes, or OVC. And so just due to the limited funding that we receive from the federal government as a state, the victims' compensation funds are limited to medical expenses, dental expenses, therapy, travel, like funeral expenses. So basically everything except property. However, that is what happens the most, either in domestic violence, but also in like burglary crimes or anything like that. And so for domestic violence, I would see a lot of, oh, he took my phone and broke it because I was trying to call 911. And so now I have no phone, and now I don't have a way to get in contact with you or my victim witness coordinator, so on and so forth. So rape and abuse does have a phone bank, but that runs out pretty quickly. And so it would be really awesome to have a victim assistance fund, which, again, a lot of those larger departments that have been around and kind of had the ups and downs, they have victim assistance funds. So it is, again, a goal before I retire from this role to eventually get to see that come to fruition, because, again, that would be huge in just like the phones, as well as, oh, I couldn't go to court for my protection order hearing because I didn't have a babysitter. So working with a licensed child care facility to help arrange that. So again, just reducing those small barriers. I don't want to say small barrier, but a barrier in the moment that will have long-reaching impact.
Sure.
I
Thank
have,
you. That
I have a
sounds great.
question. Do you find that I lost my thought. The order protection that's issued, is that a strong enough deterrent in domestic violence cases, or do you think states need to look for a different classification, a stronger deterrent? Like make it a felony or something to that?
So if you violate, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but if you violate the order of protection X amount of times, it does get bumped up to a felony, I believe. Yes, no? Okay. So I see, again, it's just very dependent. Some offenders are like, oh my gosh, I don't want to go back to jail, or I don't want to go back to prison. So they stay with a friend, they stay with family, whatever that looks like, and they follow that until it expires or until it's dropped or whatever. But then there are other people who are like, this is just a piece of paper to me, and they will continue to violate the OFP, or order for protection. So that is, again, why we work really closely with the victims of like, this is a huge step because it means that they can be held accountable for violating it, However, we still want to make sure that you're safety planning, like you're staying somewhere they don't know where you are, you block them on your phone, you turned off all location services, kind of like all of those things. So it really truly does just depend, because again, like I've seen offenders listen and follow them, and I've seen others are just like, meh, just a piece of paper.
First of all, thank you for what you do. I'm proud of Fargo that we have this position in our community, in our police department. What's your background? What's your training look like?
Yeah, so I have a master's in counseling that I received in 2018 from Eastern Illinois University, and then I moved up here, and then I worked at NDSU from 2018 until 2023 when I took this role. And while I was there, I worked in the Office of Student Activities, primarily with fraternity and sorority life. So I helped make sure, that they're following not only campus rules and city policy and the law, but also all of their respective national organizations. And so with that comes a lot of development coaching, because for our college students, that might be the first time they've ever had a rejection via a breakup or an internship. They didn't get an internship, and kind of just helping them, let them know it's going to be okay, but through an empowerment lens. And letting them maybe hit the guardrail a little bit, and it might be a little bumpy, but getting them right back on track. I also helped the advocate at NDSU, her name's Megan Talcott, help her get the sexual assault response team up and running for NDSU because they did not have one. And so that is a group of dedicated staff and faculty and a couple of students that kind of guide what sexual assault response looks like at NDSU. And so really, really passionate about just helping people that on their worst day, and letting them know that it may not feel like it's going to be okay at this point, but it'll get there eventually.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. You've done this for a year now. What's your biggest learning point or your takeaway that, like, all right, moving into the second year, you want to focus on, or you want to, like, what's your biggest takeaway from that first year?
I would say my biggest takeaway has been learning just like the law enforcement lingo and the law enforcement culture. This might come as a shock to some of you, but counseling background and counseling verbiage and lingo doesn't really mesh well with law enforcement lingo. And so kind of just letting some of our patrol officers know that I'm not going to just like corner you and try to get you to talk about your feelings every 30 minutes. But I would say that has been my biggest learning curve throughout the first year, and I really hope to continue to kind of translate my skill set and the things that victims need into officer lingo, because our officers care a lot. I know it's very frustrating for them when they go to the same house like 3 times in a week or 6 times a week, and just letting them know that, again, kind of just training them on the cycle of violence, and that our victims are not in a like rational state of mind in this cycle. And so they're undergoing a lot of trauma in their brain. They might have had past trauma, and kind of, again, just like changing all of that counseling lingo into how it makes sense for patrol officers.
You've had to learn a whole new language.
Yes, essentially.
And I assume the officers are also learning a new language as you interact with them. Have you found that the working relationship has been a positive one with the police department?
Oh, yeah. And so I remember on my very first day when I started, carried in all my bags and stuff, and then I met with Captain Offel, Lieutenant Crane, and they let me know that they are completely deferring to me to kind of shape the vision for victim services and victim response, because they said, and I quote, "We are cops, we don't think like a victim services specialist, and I don't think like a cop." And so there are some times where I'm like, "Oh, why didn't you do this?" And they're like, "Because of that." And I'm like, "Oh, that makes sense." And then there's other times where they're like, "Why are you doing this?" And I'm like, "Because of that." And they're like, "Oh, okay." So there are some times where we kind of butt heads, but it's just really important to remember that we're all on the same side, and we're here to support the victim and help them with whatever that looks like for the best situation for them. We just have different avenues of getting there, and we have different policies and procedures we have to follow.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
One last question real quick. Excellent presentation, thank you. Can you talk to them a little bit about lethality assessments?
Yes. So that is I'm like leaning over. That's one of the things that I'm very excited about and that I've been passionate about since I started. So a lethality assessment is essentially an assessment that's done every time police officers respond to a domestic call. And we're in the process of implementing it. Some departments have the officers administer the lethality assessment on the scene as they're speaking with the victim. Other departments have their victim services specialists administer it when they meet with the victim. It truly just depends on logistically, like what makes sense for your department. I have currently been doing them just because we're just trying to figure out what's the best way. So I've currently been doing them for our people that have the constant calls. So if there are more than 3 calls for service between the same 2 individuals within a year, we do the danger assessments. And so the danger assessment is a specific lethality assessment. There's a lot of other ones out there, but it was actually originally created by a nurse at Johns Hopkins University. And she was like, there has to be a way to, because they were seeing the domestic violence in emergency rooms. And so she's like, there has to be a way to track how and help the victims visually see like how dangerous this is for them, because victims often minimize or make excuses of like, oh well, if he wasn't drunk he wouldn't have pushed me down the stairs, or he only hit me once today and not 4 times. And so helping them visually see the score is a very useful tool when you're working with the victims to help them understand like how serious of a situation this is. But also for our officers, it's very helpful for them to see and identify the patterns, because oftentimes our victims move around, and so they're getting different officers every time, and so the officers aren't necessarily connecting that like, oh, there's been a response at this house 7 times, because for them it's the first time they're going. And so to be able to give that background information to officers so they understand, oh, okay, this is the pattern of behavior from the abuser. The victim is not actually uncooperative, she's just very scared, and so if I separate her from the suspect, which they do, that's standard for questioning, and just make sure for certain that he can't hear anything she's saying and comfort her, she'll give you more information to hopefully lead to an arrest. So we're currently working on those, and our goal is to eventually have our state's attorneys and our judges be able to look at them to help again see those patterns of behavior for our repeat offenders.
Yeah, that was something I was gonna ask. You know, is the Fargo Police Department, is there a training or something, you know, like that they can learn to make, you know, these calls different or improve them, that, you know, or whatever, you know, is there a certain training that we're missing?
I would say, I don't think we're missing a certain training. I know for this year, I guess, for the last Academy class, Academy 6, I was able to go in and kind of, because I was new, to share from the victim's perspective of when you respond to a call, this is kind of all the things they're going through that could be going through their brain. These are the 4 main trauma responses. This is why they may not be in your mind cooperating. And then also this is why they might blow your work phone up the next day, giving you all the information that you wanted when you were on scene, but it's because he's at work or he's asleep or whatever that looks like. And so I've seen, just even though they've just hit the streets, so to speak, I've seen a lot of positivity from that, and even just working with our officers who haven't gone through the academy in many years, kind of just in conversation explaining that, and again, just that day-to-day contact. And I know that because domestics are a bulk of the calls our officers go to, there are ongoing conversations on how we are going to revamp the academy training to make sure that they're getting that experience and also that continued training, so that you're not getting it just once in the academy. And we do quarterly training, and so that's kind of, again, all in the works for hopefully year 2 and year 3.
Do these lethality assessments, is I assume a scale 1 out of 10, 1 out of 100? What's the?
So there are 20 questions, and they range from has a lethality or has the amount of like physical violence increased? Has the level of physical violence increased? Does he have a gun? Does he use drugs? Does he use alcohol? All of those kinds of questions. And then there are 3 boxes that if you check, it either adds 2 points or takes away 2 points. And so only one of them takes away 2 points. and that is if the victim has never had kids with that person, it's a little bit safer. And so a perfect score, which is not good, would be 23.
Okay.
And so that means that you are at very extremely high risk of being either intentionally murdered by that person or accidentally murdered by that person, especially if there's strangulation involved, because that's just a very personal crime. And it's very, very easy for someone to accidentally like snap the thyroid, puncture their lung. If you lose consciousness, you can have a TBI, you may not wake up. And so there's just a lot of risk that comes with strangulation, and that's what we see most often with our very lethal cases.
So as that assessment gets closer to that 23 number, does that influence protective order? Is that visible to an officer who's responding to a call that, hey, in the past 6 months, there's been 2 assessments done at this address and they were both 19s? Is that visible to the, okay.
Yeah, so it'll be visible to officers, and that is our hope that it will start to be visible for protection order hearings. Especially because in Clay County, they are for their protection order side, and so rape and abuse does these as well with their clients. And the judges in Clay County take that into consideration when they are approving a protection order and or looking at a request to drop a protection order. And so I know a very long time ago, they used to be looked at by judges here, and we're trying to get back into that practice.
Okay. Is there a barrier, a reason why they don't view that here in Cass County?
It kind of just fell out of practice from the judges. And so I know our state's attorneys and as well as our department is really pushing for the judges to start looking at them again. And so it's just gonna take a little bit more nudging, but we're hoping to get there.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Well, thank you for an excellent presentation.
Great, thank you so much.
Now I'd like to call on Captain Chris Helmick to give a presentation.
All right, good evening, everybody. I'm Captain Chris Helmick. I'm in charge of the Professional Standards Division here at the Fargo Police Department. That division includes our Training and Development Unit and our Professional Accountability Unit. So what I'll be presenting tonight is a recent project that we did with the Crytek and regarding the Fargo PD's use of force policy and reviewing that policy. And talk a little bit about the findings of that project and the final outcome of that project as well. So. To start off, overview of what the presentation is going to include tonight. We'll talk a little bit about what Crytek is. We'll also talk about the scope of the project, the recommendations that we received from Crytek, as well as the actions that we took based on those recommendations. Okay. First of all, what is Crytek? That stands for the Collaborative Reform Initiative Technical Assistance Center. They are part of the Community-Oriented Policing Services, or commonly referred to as the COPS Office of the U.S. Department of Justice. What Crytek does is they provide technical assistance to law enforcement agencies across the country. Might note that their services are free of charge to agencies, and that is a huge benefit, especially for smaller agencies that need any type of technical assistance. They provide that assistance on a wide variety of topics, not just use of force. Part of the Crytek process is to bring in subject matter experts to assist with the process. Those experts are chosen by Crytek, and they are brought in and depending on the topic or the need, those individuals come from a wide background. To help explain a little bit more about Crytek, I have a short video here that Crytek has produced.
Each year, law enforcement agencies across the United States face new challenges, and the number of responsibilities has never been greater. The law enforcement profession evolves constantly, and the needs of communities can change in an instant. But what if you were able to enhance your agency's capabilities with subject matter experts from the field? And what if you could do it at no cost? Around the country, agencies are requesting CRITAC services. In Arkansas, agencies received de-escalation training. In Texas, technical assistance was provided on crime analysis. In Illinois, training on active shooter response was delivered. In Massachusetts, technical assistance was given on public sector partnership and coordination for crisis intervention. In California, agencies were supported in officer safety and wellness training. Agencies around the country can get tailored solutions using an easy 4-step process. First, a request is submitted on collaborativereform.org by an authorized representative from an agency. Next, an IACP staff member contacts the requester to collect more information. The CRITAC then assesses the request and determines the type of training or technical assistant to deliver. And finally, the CRITAC works with the agency and associated partners to develop a customized plan. Do you have a need in your community? Reach out to the Collaborative Reform Initiative Technical Assistance Center. By the field, for the field. Submit a request today at collaborativereform.org.
Just one note on CRITAC. You may recall that we have CRITAC currently working on a second project right now involving an extensive review of our critical incident response. That is not this project. That project is still in the works, and actually I'll be meeting with them for our bi-weekly meeting next week, and we're expecting the initial draft of that project hopefully before the end of the year. So they are just starting to wrap that up, and they'll be presenting that initial draft to us here very soon. So this one was a much smaller project and took a lot less time, but we'll walk through a little bit more of that. So when we made the request to CRITAC for assistance, what we were looking for was to take a look at our use of force policy and make sure that was in line with accepted national practices and standards. It was already a very good policy, but we recognize that there's always room for improvement, so we wanted their input, and they were willing to provide that. One of the things that we asked for was specific focus on the use of force in incidents involving vehicles. And then also part of this process, we obviously provided a copy of our current use of force policy, which is FPD Policy 300, and they used that for the review. So just to give a little bit more background how this would work, we provide that information, then I would meet with CRITAC and the subject matter expert every couple of weeks just to answer questions, get an update on the project, and as things went along, they would provide some information or they would ask additional questions by email or what have you, but it was a pretty thorough process. So the subject matter expert that was involved in this project was Chief James McGillis. He is currently the Chief of Police at Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Thank you. Chief McGillis has over 25 years of law enforcement experience, and that is a wide variety of areas in law enforcement. He did work at Milwaukee PD and retired as a captain. While in his time at Milwaukee PD, he was also the director of training and their police academy. Currently, Chief McGillis is a recognized use of force expert. He is specifically an expert in officer-involved shootings and custody death prevention. He's also a consultant both nationally and internationally for best practices in use of force. Is an emeritus law enforcement advancing data and science, also commonly referred to as LEADS, research scholar. And he worked on a project with the RAND Corporation, with the Police Executive Research Forum, IACP, and others. Now, I just touched on the highlights of his bio. If you'd like to see his full biography, I actually have a copy of that. It's very extensive and very impressive. So he had a lot of expertise that he was bringing to the table. So the findings after CRITAC completed their review of our policy, some of the things that our policy already contained prior to the review that were in line with national standards. I'll go through those here very briefly. First of all, our policy already had a component to it that stated that officers could only use deadly force when they objectively had a reasonable belief that the subject posed an imminent danger of or serious threat to the officer or other person. That's a very common component of a use of force policy and is definitely in ours. Our policy also prohibited chokeholds, so that was present. Our policy prevented the use of deadly force to prevent escape unless the subject was posing an imminent danger of death or serious injury to others. Our policy had limitations on discharging firearms at vehicles. It also contained a clause to require officers to intercede and report if another officer was using excessive force. And also there was a requirement in there for officers to render medical aid in the case if they used force against a person. Some of the recommended changes that Crytek identified that were common standards across the country, and these are in no particular order, but one of the things that they identified was to use gender-neutral wording in our policy instead of he, she. And we've recognized that in other policies since then, and we've already started to make some of those changes, so it's a little bit easier to refer to that in a different pronoun or a different way, so we're working on that. Second minor change they recommended was changing the word generate, changing the word increase to generate when talking about trying to get voluntary compliance from folks. Again, very minor change, but sometimes those words do matter. Also adding wording to our moving vehicles, which is 300.4.1. There's a couple things that they wanted us to add there. One was to add wording about a vehicle presenting, quote, imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury. And the second thing they wanted us to add in there was putting some wording about how discharging firearms at a vehicle that needs to happen only when an officer has a reasonable belief that the vehicle is being operated in a manner that threatens to cause imminent death or serious bodily injury to the officer or others. Again, just gave a little bit more specificity to that policy and give a little bit better guidance for the officers. Another thing they recommended adding was some additional wording about the ineffectiveness of shooting at a vehicle to disable it. I think we all understand it's not like on TV where I can shoot out the tires and they're going to go off the road. And they really wanted to make sure that we put in our policy that there's no point in doing that because it's just not effective. There was a minor wording change that they recommended about providing medical care up to the level of officer training. No one's expecting officers to go out and have full EMS or medical capabilities, but they do have some training in first aid response. And just wanted to clarify it to the officers that, hey, go out and do the best you can in those situations. And then the last thing was to change the training requirement to annual instead of just saying periodic. And so our policy does lay out some annual training requirements that we need to meet regarding use of force. All right, so based on those recommendations, the actions that were taken, we made those policy changes. And actually that new policy was published on October 1st of this year. And anyone can access that current policy at the Fargo, North Dakota website at this address down below. And that is currently available, like I said. Okay. So that is it. Like I said, it was a very brief project, and the recommendations were welcome. And luckily, our policy was already very well in line with national standards. But as we saw, there were some things that we made improvements on, and we were happy to make those changes. With that, any questions that I can answer for you?
One update while you're thinking about that. This is not Captain Helmick's fault, but I'm looking at the internet and we don't have the updated version on there, so I'll take care of that tomorrow morning. So it'll be there. We've put it in place, but I guess it just didn't get to the internet. So just for, in case you check and you go, hey, this isn't the updated version.
Good to know.
Can you have the updated policy sent to the board? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, we can email it to you. It's easy.
Okay.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
yep, and we'll throw it on there as well.
So once those policies are changed, it is mandated that those officers read it and understand it, and are they also trained if those policies do require some type of training, type of understanding towards that policies?
Yeah, so what that process typically looks like is we put that policy out about a week prior to it going in effect. And that gives time for all of the shift commanders and supervisors to review that with the officers and go through those changes. As far as the level of training, it often just depends on how extensive the changes are to the policy are. In this situation, because they're relatively minor, it was just really covering it with the officers and making them aware of the changes. It's also an expectation that the officers read through the policy and acknowledge in our Lexipol policy system that they've read this. And the nice thing about that system is it will compare the old version to the new version so they can clearly see what those changes are. So all of that was done with this policy before it went live roughly, well, on October 1st, like I said, so.
Yep. Yeah, the version is October 1st, so it's on my phone. The cops have it. We'll fix up the website and get you copies of it.
Yep.
And just to clarify, Lexipol, they're always updating that to best practice and standards, right? And so,
Correct.
the Fargo Police, just clarifying, you guys try to keep up to the Lexipol standard in your own training and ordinance, correct?
Correct, and as Captain Helmick pointed out, there weren't many edits that they really suggested, which was not surprising to me because of our experience with Lexipol. We know that they do that regular vetting, and we are on top of best practice in most instances of a lot of the stuff that we do, so that was good. It was a good review, and so we made a couple of additional edits and kind of go from there. But yeah, they routinely update policies, especially after legislative sessions and things like that when there's changes made.
It seems like this process was relatively painless to go through as far as getting, honest and independent feedback on the policy. What's the next policy to do the same thing for?
That's a great question.
Those are the ones I try and ask, but,
Well, let me
not
clarify on
always.
that. So I think, well, we look at all our policies continually and we're updating them, but for CRYTAC, they're servicing every law enforcement agency in the United States, so they're not going to take every request. And so having done this, I don't know that they will, unless we have some kind of situation, would entertain doing that because they just don't have enough people. And while this seemed relatively quick once we got it underway, we had some time finding the right person. We had that conflict to get past and then ended up in the same spot, but there's limited capacity staff-wise for them to just do every request.
So at this point, then, we are not requesting.
No,
any
we will not be,
additional
I won't
okay.
be sending
Copy.
anything more to them,
Yep.
just because they've done us a tremendous benefit in doing that, along with our critical response, which I think will be very informative and useful in a lot of ways. And, one agency can't take up a vast amount of their staff, and I think we have to be fair on that. But certainly if there's something large that comes up, we could, use them in the future, but we want to be respectful of that.
What critical incidents were analyzed in determining the policy changes?
They really didn't look at specific incidents. They were looking more at the policy that was currently in existence at that point versus what some of the standards are, especially coming from the Department of Justice. And PERF was another resource, and they had some other resources that they referenced in their work project. But they weren't looking at a specific incident. They'd ask some questions about various incidents, but for the most part, they were just looking at the content of the current policy and what needed to be changed.
So no specific incidents were reviewed?
No.
You understand, Dave, that the specific incident review is the critical incident response that they're working on. Does that make sense?
Can you repeat that?
Hang on, yes. So just so we're on the same page, the critical incident response is the incident-specific review that they're doing. Okay, so I'll make sure we understand that.
Any other questions?
So the one they're doing is they're looking at how that response and the guidelines say, like, were these incidents following best practice? Is that, I'm just trying to clarify that.
They will look at response, training, all of that stuff, and provide any recommendations relative to that.
And so the incidents that are gonna be looked at, is it possible those could result in policy change as well, in terms of use of force?
I'm sure it's possible, yeah. I mean, I think as they look at each one of those, there could be recommendations in a variety of areas, depending on each circumstance is different, so sure, it's possible. And I think, again, that will be a informative report that will probably provide some very interesting insight and recommendation.
And I can just jump in there for a second on that project, but I also work with them on this, and I can tell you it's pretty extensive what they're looking at. I just got a follow-up question from one of their team members about our wellness program and our community engagement team. And so, I mean, they're really looking at a wide variety of things and how that ties into incident response. I think it's going to have some really good information for our department and how we can improve and what we're doing well already. But it's going to cover a lot of areas.
My perception is it would have been duplication of effort had they reviewed specific incidents because they've already reviewed those as part of the other study, is that right?
That's a really great point, actually, because that was also part of this project, actually both projects, is making sure that there's not a lot of crossover there. So they were always, one of the coordinators was involved with both projects. So just trying to make sure that, hey, we're going to keep this over here.
Lanes of the road, this adds,
Yep.
but is different and separate.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
Makes
two
sense.
different scopes that we're looking at. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other business that we'd like to bring up?
I have one quick question then for
Yes.
you. Just going back to the doodle poll, were there any days that you wanted eliminated other than Friday to try and schedule that? Well, we won't do weekends, yeah. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we'll keep open. That's a good call.
Outside of Friday? No.
Okay, so Monday through Thursday, we'll try and get it in December. Slate, I think an hour is probably sufficient. You agree, or do you want longer than an hour?
Yeah, I think if we can find a couple options between now and the next meeting in December, I think that would be a.
Okay, all right, so you'll get that doodle poll tomorrow. Kelsey will get that out to you. We'll get that lined up.
Any other? Okay, well, the meeting of the Police Advisory and Oversight Board stands adjourned. Thanks, everyone, for attending.
Thank you.